The bell above the diner door issued a frantic, cracked chime at 4:17 p.m. It was a sound of small emergencies, spilled coffee, a forgotten wallet. Not the silent, breathless terror that now crossed its threshold. Lily, a girl who seemed to be made of little more than oversized jeans and the frayed straps of a backpack, stumbled inside. Her lungs burned, each gasp a tiny, ragged tear in the thick, greasy air of the greasy spoon. She leaned against the glass, her small hand leaving a sweaty print, her gaze fixed on the street outside. A dark sedan, a generic and therefore menacing shape, cruised past, its windows tinted to an impenetrable black. It moved with the slow, predatory patience of a shark. The diner's handful of patrons barely registered her arrival. A trucker hunched over a plate of cooling fries. Two old men in flannel arguing about property taxes. But Lily saw them. In the corner booth, a knot of stillness in the room's low hum, sat 7 men. They were large, dressed in worn leather vests adorned with patches that looked like a language she didn't know but somehow understood. Chrome buckles and steel-toed boots reflected the dull fluorescent lights. They weren't talking, just nursing cups of black coffee with a quiet intensity that felt older than the faded linoleum floor. The man at the head of the booth, his face a roadmap of sun and wind, looked up. His eyes, the color of wet slate, met hers for a fraction of a second. He saw not a child, but a refugee seeking asylum. Jean, the owner, emerged from behind the counter, a damp rag in his hand. His face, perpetually soured by the daily grind, tightened. "Hey kid, this isn't a bus station. No loitering. Buy something or get out." He gestured with the rag toward the door. Lily didn't flinch. Her attention remained on the window, on the sedan that had now reached the end of the block and was making a slow, deliberate U-turn. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the lazy thrum of the ceiling fan. The clatter of a dropped fork from the next table made her jump, a jarring metallic shriek in her private world of silence and fear. The moral stakes of the universe had shrunk to the size of this small, sticky diner. A terrified child, an indifferent gatekeeper, and a silent, watching collective whose potential for violence or protection was yet unknown. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the unspoken question of what happens when a person with no power asks for help from those who have nothing left to lose. The sedan completed its turn. It was coming back. Her voice had been a small, steady thread over the phone line earlier that day, a stark contrast to the chaotic static of the social services hotline. "My name is Lily Parker. I'm in the Northwood group home. A man, Mr. Arthur Albright, he says he's coming for me on Friday. He says the papers are just a formality." There was a click, a sigh, the sound of 1,000 other calls just like this one. The woman on the other end, her voice worn smooth by bureaucratic apathy, responded with a practiced monotone. "Ma'am, miss, is there an immediate, credible threat of physical harm?" Lily's throat tightened. "How did you explain that the worst threats were the quiet ones?" "He locks the pantry," she said, her words precise. "He has a closet. He calls it the discipline box. He told me if I ever told anyone, he would make sure no one ever believed me. He said he has friends." There was another pause, the rustle of a file being opened. "Miss Parker, our records show that Mr. Albright is a Tier 4 foster parent. He's a respected community member, a donor to the policeman's ball. We have his file right here. It's spotless." The woman's tone shifted, taking on a saccharine, condescending edge. "Are you certain you're not exaggerating a little? Sometimes, when we want to stay in one place, we can make things seem worse than they are. Strict rules can feel unfair to a young person." The conversation ended not with a promise of help, but with a 14-digit reference number, an alphanumeric string that was supposed to represent her fear, but in reality was just a digital placeholder for a problem no one wanted to solve. It was a number to be filed, not a person to be saved. This wasn't her first attempt. A week prior, she had spoken to Ms. Gable, the school counselor, a woman with kind eyes and a mountain of paperwork on her desk. She had listened patiently, nodding and making notes on a yellow legal pad. "That sounds very difficult, Lily. Let me look into Mr. Albright's file and I'll make some inquiries. But then the district announced budget cuts, and Ms. Gable's time was consumed by meetings about saving the art program. Lily's file and the inquiries were buried. The system, in all its procedural wisdom, had a category for everything. Mr. Albright's cruelty was classified as discipline, his control was structure, her terror was incompatibility. It was the ordinary, everyday cruelty of a system designed to protect itself first and children second. Every door she knocked on remained closed. Every plea for help was translated into a language of liability and protocol until its meaning was lost. She was dismissed, her reality denied by the very people paid to protect it. Lily's room at the Northwood Group home was a beige box, furnished with a metal frame bed, a particle board desk, and a shallow closet. It smelled of industrial cleaner and the faint, lingering sadness of the children who had lived there before her. But in one corner, she had carved out a space that was entirely her own. Taped to the wall was a single piece of paper, a detailed pencil drawing of a wolf pack moving through a snowy forest. She had spent weeks on it, capturing the fierce loyalty in their eyes, the way they moved as one entity. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a prayer for a family she had never known. Her life was a series of quiet rituals meant to impose order on chaos. Every morning, she made her bed with perfect, crisp hospital corners, a skill taught to her by a kind but temporary foster mother in a home she'd only been in for 3 months. She kept her single change of clothes folded in a neat square in her drawer. Her homework was always completed, her handwriting a flawless, looping cursive. This discipline was her armor. It was a way of proving to the world, and to herself, that she was not the problem. She was good. She followed the rules. She was worthy of being saved. Memories of Mr. Albright's house were not cinematic flashbacks, but sensory ambushes. The cloying scent of pine-scented cleaner that never quite masked the smell of damp rot in the floorboards. The unnerving weight of his stare as she ate her dinner, measuring every bite. The specific metallic click of the deadbolt on the pantry door. She never described the discipline box to anyone, not in detail. Instead, her fear manifested in other ways. She could not be in a room if the closet door was open. She would take the long way around the school to avoid the janitor's narrow supply room. It was a terror that lived in her bones, a primal fear of small, dark, airless spaces. Her integrity was as quiet and fierce as her routines. 2 weeks ago, she had found a wallet on the sidewalk containing $73 and a driver's license. For a girl who owned nothing but what was in her backpack, the money was a fortune. But without a moment's hesitation, she had walked 10 blocks to the address on the license and slipped it into the mail slot. She didn't wait for a thank you. The act itself was the point. It was a declaration to an uncaring universe. I am not broken. I am not a thief. I am Lily Parker, and my life has value. This was the human cost of the system's failure. A child forced to build a fortress inside herself because no one would build one around her. The week crawled by, each day a slow-motion torment of anticipation. Friday arrived not with a storm, but with a deceptively bright, sunny morning. The threat, however, was no longer abstract. It came in a small, square cardboard box delivered by a courier just after breakfast. The return address was a simple, elegant monogram. A.A., the group home supervisor. A well-meaning but overwhelmed woman named Carol handed it to Lily. "Looks like someone is thinking of you," she said with a cheerful smile. Lily's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled in a bed of white tissue paper, was a porcelain doll. It had her dark hair, her brown eyes, and it was dressed in a miniature version of the same jeans and gray t-shirt she was wearing that day. Its painted-on smile was a grotesque mockery. Tucked into its hand was a small, cream-colored card, Mr. Albright's perfect calligraphy gracing the surface. "Ready to come home? 5 p.m., Carol peered over her shoulder. "Oh, how lovely. What a thoughtful man. See? He does care about you. He even got your outfit right." She saw a peace offering. Lily saw a trophy, a claim of ownership, a chilling promise that he saw everything. This was not a gift. It was a leash. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her carefully constructed composure. She ran to the payphone in the hall, her coin clattering as she dialed the hotline number she now knew by heart. She repeated her story, her voice cracking for the first time. "He sent me a doll. Is wearing my clothes. He's coming at 5. Please, you have to do something." The voice on the other end was different this time, but the message was the same. A series of clicks as the operator accessed her file. "Ah yes, Lily Parker. Reference number 7-4B9-2. I see a note was made about your concerns. I also see that Mr. Albright's final custody papers are being processed today. Our hands are tied by the legal framework. We can schedule a mandatory wellness check for sometime next week." "Next week will be too late," Lily whispered, the words swallowed by the hollow receiver. The line went dead. The system's failure was no longer passive indifference. It was active complicity. The walls were closing in, the gears of bureaucracy grinding forward to deliver her back to her tormentor. The clock on the wall read 3:30 p.m. She had 90 minutes. She ran back to her room, the porcelain doll's vacant eyes seeming to follow her. She grabbed her backpack, shoving in her change of clothes and, carefully, her drawing of the wolf pack. It was all she had. It was everything. She slipped out the back door, a ghost leaving a house that was never a home, and ran. She stood before their table, a small island of terrified calm in the sea of their leather-clad presence. The dark sedan passed the diner's window again, slower this time, a predator circling its prey. It was 4:18 p.m. Time was running out. Lily took a deep breath, the air tasting of coffee grounds and desperation, and walked the 10 feet from the door to the corner booth. Her hands, clenched at her sides, were trembling, but her voice, when it came, was as clear and cold as a shard of ice. She did not beg or cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated the facts, laying them on the table like evidence in a trial. "My name is Lily. A man named Arthur Albright is coming for me at 5 o'clock. She paused, letting the words settle. "The system gave him the papers. He hurts children, and no one listens." She looked directly at the man at the head of the table, the one with eyes like slate. His gaze was unervingly steady, and for the first time, she felt seen. Not as a problem or a case file, but as a person. "He's coming?" she repeated, the two words carrying the weight of her entire 11 years. Slate didn't move. He looked at the man on his right, a grizzled giant with a long gray beard, then to the others. A silent conversation passed between them, a flurry of understanding that needed no words. This wasn't a job for fists. This was something else entirely. Their code, the invisible architecture that held their brotherhood together, had been activated. An older biker, his vest bearing a patch that simply read Preacher, leaned forward. His voice was a low, gentle rumble, a stark contrast to his fearsome appearance. "Why us, little one?" he asked. "Why not the police?" Lily's gaze dropped from Slate's face to the patches on their vests. Her eyes traced the intricate stitching. One, over Slate's heart, depicted a shield protecting a single small flame. Another, on Preacher's arm, read Guardians of the Covenant. She looked back at Slate. "The police have files and procedures. They didn't listen." She pointed a small, trembling finger at the patch on his chest. "You look like you don't let the fire go out." The simplicity of it, the profound truth in her observation, landed with the force of a gavel. She had seen past the leather and the chrome, past the intimidating facade, and recognized the core principle of their existence. She had not asked them to be violent. She had asked them to be guardians. Slate held her gaze for a long moment, the entire diner seeming to hold its breath. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. The decision was made. "The covenant is invoked," he said, his voice quiet but resonant with absolute authority. No child stands alone in that moment. Lily's fear did not vanish, but it changed. It was no longer the isolating, suffocating terror of a lone victim. It was now a shared burden, an emotion that was about to be transformed into methodical, disciplined, and righteous action. The time was 4:25 p.m. The quiet contemplation of the corner booth was over. Slate retrieved a rugged, battle-scarred flip phone from his vest pocket, a relic from an era before constant connectivity. He dialed a single number from memory. The call was answered on the first ring. "Slate," he said, his tone all business. "Code 9. Location, Greasy Spoon on Elm. Target, Albright, Arthur. Victim, minor, female, age 11. Time on target, 1,700 hours. The voice on the other end was female, crisp, and devoid of panic. "Acknowledged, Slate. This is Anya. I'm pulling his record now. Any priors?" Slate glanced at Lily, who was now sitting in the booth, a glass of water untouched in front of her. Sealed juvenile complaints from 2 previous foster placements. Both removed for incompatibility. Anya's voice sharpened with professional focus. "That's the flag. Incompatibility is a euphemism for a child who tried to speak up. I'm 5 minutes from the courthouse. I'll file an emergency motion. Keep it lawful. Document everything. Presence, not force. I'm on my way." The call ended. A silent, efficient machine had just been switched on. Preacher sent out a single text message from his own phone, a coded string of numbers and letters that rippled through their network. The mobilization began. It was a montage of quiet readiness across 3 counties. In a suburban garage, a high school history teacher stopped tuning his lawnmower, wiped his hands on a rag, and methodically pulled on his leather vest. In a downtown office, an accountant finished a spreadsheet, logged out of his computer, and walked calmly to the parking garage. In a dusty workshop, a mechanic put down his wrench, his movements precise and unhurried. They were teachers, electricians, veterans, and small business owners. The vests were not a costume, but a uniform signifying a promise. The low rumble started as a solo note, then a duet, then a chorus. Engines turned over, their sound a deep, resonant hum that promised not chaos, but order. Outside the Greasy Spoon, the 7 motorcycles were joined by 2 more, then 5, then 7. They parked in neat, diagonal rows, a display of disciplined power that drew the attention of passersby. By 4:45 p.m., 21 bikes lined the street. Gene, the diner owner, stood by the door, his face pale, the damp rag hanging limp in his hand. He said nothing. Across the street, a nondescript news van pulled to the curb, its engine idling. The cameraman didn't get out, simply adjusted his lens. A silent observer tipped off by Anya Sharma. Lily watched from the window, her small frame flanked by the quiet giants. The growing legion outside was not a gang. It was a shield being assembled, piece by powerful piece. The clock on the dashboard of Arthur Albright's sedan read 4:58 p.m. He was a man who prided himself on punctuality. He pulled up in front of the Northwood Group home, a pristine building on a street of well-manicured lawns. He was the picture of civic virtue. A charcoal gray suit, a confident smile, and the easy air of a man accustomed to getting what he wants. He smiled and waved at a neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who was watering her petunias. She smiled back weakly, her hand trembling slightly on the hose. He walked up the concrete path to the front door and rang the bell. He expected Carol, the supervisor, to open it, holding Lily's small suitcase. Instead, the door remained closed. He rang again, his smile tightening. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his lawyer. "The order is signed and executed. She is legally yours. Effective 1,700 hours." He checked his watch. 5:01 p.m. He was now her legal guardian. He had won. He turned from the door, a flicker of irritation on his face, ready to make a call to demand compliance. But he stopped. The street was no longer empty. At the far end of the block, arrayed in a silent, immovable phalanx, were 21 motorcycles. Their chrome glinted in the late afternoon sun, a wall of polished steel. At the near end, blocking the only exit, a modest blue sedan was parked diagonally across the road. The neighbors were no longer in their houses. They stood on their porches, on their lawns, watching. Phones were raised, recording. The news van across the street was now obvious, its telescopic lens pointed directly at him. The bikers did not rev their engines. They did not shout or make threats. They simply sat, their collective presence a silent, overwhelming judgment. At the head of the formation, astride a powerful but quiet machine, was Slate. His engine was off. His gaze was fixed on Albright. Albright's carefully constructed composure began to crumble. This was not in the script. This was an unforeseen variable, a chaotic element in his meticulously ordered world. He saw Lily. She was standing just behind Slate, not cowering but standing tall. Her fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. He fell back on the one thing he trusted, the law he had so expertly manipulated. "That is my child," he shouted, his voice a pitch too high. He brandished the custody papers he had printed, waving them like a talisman. "I have the legal documents. You are all breaking the law." Slate did not even look at him. His attention was on the blue sedan. Anya Sharma stepped out, holding a thick legal file. She closed the car door with a firm, definitive click that echoed down the silent street. The confrontation had begun, not with a roar, but with the quiet arrival of due process. Anya Sharma walked toward the center of the street, her heels clicking on the asphalt. She was a small woman, but she moved with an unassailable authority that had nothing to do with size. The silence on the block was now absolute, a heavy blanket under which the truth was about to be revealed. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, professional, and carried easily in the still air. "Mr. Albright, my name is Anya Sharma. I am an officer of the court, and I represent this child." Albright scoffed, a desperate, theatrical sound. "Represent her? On what grounds? The fantasies of a troubled, delinquent girl? I have a court order." Anya did not rise to the bait. She stopped 10 feet from him, a safe legal distance. "We have just filed an emergency motion to stay that custody order, based on newly submitted evidence and testimony." "What evidence?" he blustered, his face flushing a blotchy red. "There is no evidence." As if on cue, a new voice broke the silence. Came from the porch next door. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor with the petunias, stepped forward, her garden hose lying forgotten on the grass. Her voice shook, but it was firm. "It's not fantasy," she said, looking directly at the police cars that were now arriving, their lights off. "I've heard things, through the walls, crying. And a man's voice angry." She held up her cell phone. "My nephew showed me how to use the voice recorder app. I have recordings." Her words hung in the air, a stunning betrayal of the suburban code of silence. In the news van, an editor's eyes widened. This was no longer a story about bikers. It was a story about a community finding its courage. Anya continued, her tone relentless. "We also have this." She opened her file. "A sworn affidavit from David Chun, placed in your care in 2018. And another from Maria Flores, 2020. Both were removed from your home, citing incompatibility. Both are now willing to testify, under oath, about being locked in a pantry for hours at a time. Both describe a small, dark closet in the basement you referred to as the discipline box." Albright's face, which had been red with anger, turned a pasty ashen white. The mask of the benevolent community pillar disintegrated, revealing the hollow-eyed monster beneath. The sealed records were being cracked open, right here on the pavement. The two police officers approached, their expressions grim. They walked past the silent wall of bikers, past Anya, and stopped in front of Albright. One of them, a detective with tired eyes, took the file Anya offered him. He flipped through the first few pages, his jaw tightening. He looked up from the affidavits, his gaze locking onto Albright's. The public performance was over. The revelation was complete. The courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side sat Arthur Albright and his expensive, sharp-suited lawyer. On the other, there was no one at the plaintiff's table. Instead, the public gallery was filled. The first 3 rows were occupied by the guardians of the covenant, their leather vests clean and pressed, their posture as rigid and disciplined as soldiers on parade. Behind them sat a crowd of unfamiliar faces that had become a familiar force. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor, Jean from the diner, looking uncomfortable in a collared shirt. The school counselor, Ms. Gable, her face etched with shame, and dozens of other community members who had seen the news report and felt compelled to bear witness. Judge Marion Hayes, a woman renowned for her sharp intellect and intolerance for legal theatrics, presided over the emergency hearing. Albright's lawyer began with a blustering attack, painting the Guardians as a menacing vigilante gang who had intimidated his client and terrorized a neighborhood. Anya Sharma, when it was her turn, rose calmly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "please look at the men in the gallery. They broke no laws. They issued no threats. They did not brandish weapons. They did not even raise their voices. They simply stood. They provided a shield so that a terrified child's truth could finally find its voice. Their presence was not an act of intimidation. It was an act of profound civil responsibility. It was an act of witness." The judge's gaze swept over the silent bikers, her expression unreadable. The testimonies were presented. The chilling audio recordings from Mrs. Gable's phone filled the courtroom. Video depositions from David Chun and Maria Flores, now young adults living in other states, played on a large screen. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar, painting a consistent, undeniable picture of systematic abuse hidden behind a veneer of respectability. Finally, Anya called her last witness. The petitioner calls Lily Parker. Lily walked to the stand, her steps small but sure. Slate caught her eye from the front row and gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. She looked impossibly small in the large witness box. Anya approached her gently. "Lily, I'm not going to ask you to talk about Mr. Albright. I have just one question for you. When you went into that diner and spoke to these men, what did you ask them for? Did you ask them to hurt him?" Lily shook her head. "No." "Did you ask them to break the law?" "No." "Then what did you tell them you needed?" Lily looked away from Anya, her gaze sweeping over the jury, the judge, and finally settling on Slate. Her voice, though quiet, was perfectly clear and carried to every corner of the silent room. "I told them I needed them to make sure the fire didn't go out." A wave of understanding seemed to pass through the courtroom. The judge's ruling was delivered less than an hour later. Arthur Albright's temporary custody was permanently revoked. His foster license was suspended pending a criminal investigation, which the judge herself ordered the district attorney to open immediately. Justice, swift and decisive, had been delivered. As Lily left the courtroom, the Guardians rose as one. They formed two silent, parallel lines, creating a corridor of honor from the courtroom door to the main exit. She walked through it, her head held high, no longer a victim, but a survivor. At the end of the hall, a man and woman with kind, nervous smiles were waiting with Anya. It was her new family, her new beginning. Dignity had been restored. The events of that fall afternoon sent ripples through the placid surface of the community, and those ripples grew into waves of change. 6 months later, the landscape of child protective services in the county was unrecognizable. Following a scathing investigative report by the local news, the department's leadership was replaced, and its procedures were completely overhauled. A new emergency response protocol was enacted, formally designated as Child Advocacy Mandate 7, but known colloquially among the social workers as the Covenant Code. It required an immediate, in-person, two-person team investigation of any credible accusation of abuse made by a child, effectively dismantling the bureaucratic firewalls that had failed Lily so catastrophically. The Guardians of the Covenant, once a private brotherhood, found themselves in an unexpected public role. With Anya Sharma's guidance, they established a chartered non-profit organization, Covenant Advocates for Children. Their mission was simple and lawful. They worked with Anya's legal aid clinic to provide court escorts, a visible and silent support system for children testifying in abuse and custody cases. They never spoke in court. They never made threats. They simply sat in the gallery, a stoic, leather-clad promise that the child on the stand was not alone. Their funding came not from large grants, but from 100 small donations. $20 from a mechanic, 50 from a teacher, 10 from Gene at the diner, who now kept a donation jar permanently on his counter. The phrase "discipline box" entered the local lexicon as a chilling cautionary tale, a term used in training seminars for new police recruits and social workers, a stark symbol of the type of hidden, systemic cruelty that could no longer be ignored. The final scene of the transformation took place not in a courtroom, but in a park on a bright Saturday morning. A new playground, funded by a community-wide fundraising drive, was being dedicated. On a bench overlooking the brightly colored swings and slides, a small brass plaque had been installed. It read, "For the ones who stand witness, so no fire goes out." Lily was there. She was 12 now, and the last 6 months had worked a quiet miracle. The haunted, watchful look in her eyes had been replaced by the easy laughter of a child at play. She chased her new foster sister around the slide, her movements light and free. She was no longer defined by her trauma, but by her resilience. After a long, breathless game of tag, she ran over to the bench where Slate was sitting. He was out of his vest today, wearing a simple black t-shirt, looking less like a biker president and more like a quiet, watchful grandfather. She held out a piece of paper to him. It was a new drawing. The detailed, monochrome wolf pack was gone. In its place was a vibrant, colorful picture drawn in crayon. It showed a single, enormous shield, and behind it, protected and safe, were hundreds of tiny, brightly colored flames, each one unique, each one burning bright. He took the drawing, his large, calloused hands gentle. He studied it for a long moment, a flicker of something profound in his slate-gray eyes. He looked from the drawing to the laughing child before him, and then to the playground full of children, their shouts of joy filling the air. He didn't need to say anything. He just nodded. The legacy of their stand wasn't in the new laws or the nonprofit organization. It was here in the simple, restorative fact that a child felt safe enough to play in the sun. Justice had been transformed from an abstract concept into a living, breathing, and fiercely protected reality. The story had found its resolution, but the work of the covenant, the quiet promise to stand witness, would continue for as long as there were fires in danger of going out.